All right, our friend Chris Mannix is here from Sports Illustrated, and you're always popping up all over the place. You'll pop on random boxing cards. I never know. You always keep me on my toes. The Chris Paul makes the finals. People love this. They love when the old guy, the quest for the ring, stuff like that. Watching that game last night, there were all these different storylines going on, including some real animosity, it felt like, with the Clippers and the Suns. But I'm not the first person to say this. That was the complete package Chris Paul game. It was I'm putting my team on my back game. There's no way we're fucking losing this game. I'm going to throw in a couple flops here. I'm super annoying. I'm super competitive. I am the fulcrum of this team. It was kind of like weirdly his defining game. I loved it.
Yeah, I loved it too. I was in Phoenix for Game 5 and like watching them kind of choke that game away. You had to know that in the back of Chris Paul's mind, like he loses this Game 6 and every story for 48 hours is 3-1. Like Chris Paul, could he lose 3-1 one more time? I feel like that had to have been a motivating factor for him in this game. I mean, it probably wasn't the only reason he played that well. It wasn't the only reason the Suns won that game. I did feel like after Game 5, we saw like the last stand of the Clippers. We saw everything Paul George had to give. You had a remarkable DeMarcus Cousins stint. I mean, Ty Lue pushing every button that he could to make it work. But I got to believe Chris Paul like just didn't want to hear the, going back home to Phoenix 3-1 stories. Will Chris Paul blow it again? Will this be a line in his resume? I mean, so I think that was part of the motivation for him in that one.
What was cool about it, this has been an issue in his career, right? Where it's like, I'm giving you a 22 and 11 in every playoff game, basically. I am the most consistent point guard who's ever lived. But if we really need me, or else we're going to lose, then it gets a little dicier. Now, we saw it with like Spurs 2015. He made the game-winning shot. He's playing on one legs. But for the most part, it seemed like he would wear down. It seemed like in the biggest stages, sometimes he just didn't come through. And just in general, it's the curse of the little guy, which we've only seen a couple people really overcome. Isaiah Thomas was able to do it. We've seen people do it for short stretches. Isaiah Thomas on the Celtics that one year. But for the most part, Russell and I did a Book of Basketball pod about him in December. And the premise was basically, can you call Chris Paul the point guard if he's never made the finals? Like, how do we reconcile this? Mm-hmm. The way he's flipped his legacy, even just making the finals was a legacy flipper. If he wins it, then it becomes a different conversation where it's like you start talking about, was this the second best point guard of all time? Did he officially pass Isaiah? I feel like he has to. Does he move into, like, on my pyramid? Is he a top 20 guy? Things like that. I had him 40 before the season. I have him 30 now. I have him right on the cusp of level 4, like right next to Stockton. Mm-hmm. But now we have this chance for this guy to rewrite it. It doesn't happen that often in basketball. I can't even remember the last time it happened. But had you given up on Chris Paul as this possibility?
No, because I feel like he reinvented himself last year. And like I thought last year you could make the case was like the finest year of his career before this season. Because to go to Oklahoma City and not just embrace it, accept it and embrace it, but to elevate that team, which had no business as a 6 seed, like no business being the 6 seed in the playoffs, to elevate that team the way he did, that showed me a different side of Chris Paul. Because up until that point, I'd kind of felt a similar way as you. Like, is there an underachiever in him? Are we going to look back and say, like, he should have done more with the Clippers teams, with the Rockets teams? Like, it would always be like maybe he wasn't on that level. Like, even though they got beat in the first round, like I thought that was like that 7-game series with Houston was one of his finest playoff performances. That year in general was his finest year. And look, I'm among the people that believe Phoenix was on the upswing anyway. I don't believe that the bubble games were an aberration. I thought that they caught something in there that was going to carry over no matter what. But the way he elevated DeAndre Ayton, the way he picked up some of these young guys like Mikal Bridges and made them better. I mean, he's written an entire new chapter in his career. And that's not something you say about a lot of guys that, some guys are able to kind of recapture old glory. Chris Paul never really had old glory. He now is finding new glory at 35, 36 years old. And that's not something you see very often.
Yeah, it was interesting hearing him talk in the post game about, and I had great years here and 6 years of the Clippers. And I'm like, this was the Amityville Horror House for you? Like,
Yeah.
It's like somebody going back to the haunted house. But I had some great years here, except, that time the blood came out of the walls and my daughter was levitating over her bed. He had some awful playoff losses. And I think you look back at the 14 and 15 teams and it's almost like a documentary. And then it seemed like the ship had sailed. And I think I did a podcast, I think it was beginning of April, about like basically the case for the Suns. Because I felt like they had a game in Utah when they beat Utah in overtime. And it was the first time I was like, wait a second. This is a weird year. It could be just one of those years where like Toronto in 2019, where it's like, wow, that happened. This team is the first team that's built for him. It wasn't intended to be built for him. But when you look at like, he's got the shooters, he's got the second scorer, he's got the big guy, he's got the force of personality. They revere him. And it just seemed like, wow, could this happen? With that said, I still feel like the Lakers are better. And I still feel like Kawhi, if he's healthy, I think this Clippers team would have beaten the Suns.
You can make the case for Denver too. Like, does Denver beat him with Jamal Murray? Like, I mean, look, it's not their fault. You play who's in front of you, but
yes. This is the old Patriots argument, right? Where the Patriots, this. Like, hey,
I don't know. Like, I don't know where you stand. Like, the asterisk thing is stupid to me. Like, like I don't remember. Like, the Mavericks won the championship in 2011. I don't really remember off the top of my head who won in 2010. Like, it's just like you don't remember. You're not going to look back and say, well, that Suns team, if they won the finals, they had to beat a Kawhi-less Clippers team. Like, that doesn't really happen. Nobody actually thinks like that as history begins to unfold. So, I think this Suns team, the impact of Chris Paul. I look at the DeAndre Ayton stuff. That to me is the biggest part of all this. Like,
it's like 1.5 Chris Pauls.
It is, and like, but Ayton, he always had this potential, and even I didn't really love him in the bubble either. Like in the bubble, I'm looking at a guy like his hands aren't great. He kind of gets frustrated. He doesn't get post touches. Like the impact Chris Paul had on DeAndre Ayton this year, basically convincing him that it's okay to be a lob catcher. It's okay to be a defensive staple. It's okay to, I'll get you to your double doubles. I'll get you your touches so you get your points there. Like, I think Paul's impact on DeAndre Ayton's mindset, was one of the biggest influencers of the success of this team. Booker was going to do Booker things. Like, he was on his way up no matter what. But Ayton was the linchpin. That's a top 10 defense. And that's largely because of DeAndre Ayton. I don't think DeAndre Ayton plays the same this year if Ricky Rubio is there and not Chris Paul.
I had some Celtics pangs with this Chris Paul thing. There was a couple of different times when it felt like they could have had him, right? The draft, they almost traded Pierce for him. There was Rondo. When were the Rondo Chris Paul rumors? What was that, 2010 range?
Yeah.
And then Rondo found out.
Rondo got pissed. He got pissed.
Yeah, there was a whole feud with them. I'm sure there were moments in 18 and 19. That's another hilarious thing with this Chris Paul piece where he's the worst one of the worst contracts in the league for 2 years. You have to give away draft picks with him to get rid of him when you're Houston. And now he's going to get a massive extension. And I'm sure the Knicks will be waiting just in case, but I would assume.
I doubt it gets that far. I wouldn't be surprised if he, everything I've heard, you opt in, then you extend like 2 years on the back end of that deal. So you basically you finish your career with, and you can save the Suns a little bit of money on the final 2 years because you're collecting that $44 million on this next year. So I think he's retiring in Phoenix. It seems like it works there.
Are you sure Big Shot Bobby Sarver's not going to get a little
that worries me. That does worry me. Bob Sarver worries me. That's going to become an expensive roster in the next couple of years.
Yeah, because you got to give Ayton a bag. They're already talking about give Ayton the bag. Booker's making max, and then Chris. Look, this probably isn't time to talk about it as we're having this Chris Paul celebration thing. But do you want to be paying Chris Paul $40 million like 3 years from now, and he's going to be 40? He's already but the stuff he's doing now has never happened. Like 3 years from now, he's going to be doing this.
Don't you think Chris's game's going to age really well, though? Like, he doesn't rely on athleticism at all. Like, his entire game is like dribble across the lane and shoot a mid-range jump shot. He doesn't even defend at this. Like, his defense is like reaching in and kind of swatting balls away at this point. I think like the way he's playing now, and the fact too, Bill, like like after that season when he went down with that hamstring injury, he went the Brady route. Like he started to do that plyometric stuff and work on his flexibility, and it worked.
Yeah.
And it worked. Like he played 70 plus games each of the last 2 years. So I think health wise, he's figured some things out too. I wouldn't hesitate to give Chris Paul, 2 more years on the back end and let him go till 40 with this team. You kind of have to at this point.
Well, I wonder if it's going to end up being like football quarterbacks, where it seemed inconceivable that Brady was going to play into his 40s, even though he was telling us he was going to play into his 40s, and then he did. Now we have Rodgers. It's going to be 38. He wants to play another 5-6 years, and it's just where it's going, and it makes more sense now. We haven't seen this really happen with basketball in the same way, but it feels like it's about to. Like LeBron is at a minutes number that the history of the league says his career is going to end pretty soon. But if you use the quarterback analogy, like maybe he can play 75,000 minutes. 60,000's been really the limit for everybody. Like that Kareem kind of set the standard, but maybe you go 75,000. So then when I think of Chris, like, could he play 30 minutes a game, 70 games a year? So he's basically playing 2,000 regular season minutes and then another 800 in the playoffs. And you're just very careful. It's almost like having the fancy, awesome car in your garage that you're not driving to California, but you'll take to, the beach. And maybe you could get to 40. I just feel like with Sarver, that guy has had no history of ever spending. And and really they should have won in the mid 2000s and didn't, because he just wouldn't go over a certain number. So the thought of him having 3 max guys seems inconceivable to me.
Yeah, it would worry me. But what choice do you have? Like, if you don't discuss those 2 extra years with Chris, he'll opt out and he'll get a big offer from the Knicks. Like somebody's going to pay Chris Paul. Be the Knicks. Chris Paul big money this off. The Knicks are interesting. They might run a Mike Conley too. Like there's a lot of the Knicks might be leverage for everybody at this point the next couple of months. So if you don't, like, what are you telling your fan? What are you telling your team? Like you're going to replace Chris Paul with Cameron Payne? Like I love Cameron Payne, but I don't want to see Cameron Payne in a Chris Paul role for an entire season plus the playoffs. He found lightning in a bottle in this series. Deserves to get paid for it, but I don't want to see him, replacing Chris Paul. Like you've got to do it. You have no choice, or else you're going to wind up, blowing an opportunity to create like this 3-year window to be a championship team. I agree with you. Sarver's crazy. Like he would worry me a little bit if I'm a Phoenix fan, but I'm not sure. He's kind of boxed in here. I don't know what else they do but bring Chris Paul back.
And also, if you bring him back, the 3-year run thing's a great point, because everything else is in place, right? You have the swing guys either on rookie contracts or in Crowder's case on a real contract. You have Ayton you're going to pay. Booker's under contract. You get Chris. You get some veteran minimum dude to be like your 8th guy replacing Saric, and you're good to go for 2 more years. I think the West has a chance to be really great next year, because you feel like the Lakers, LeBron will have this whole summer to really get in crazy shape. Same for Davis. Golden State's up to shit. I don't know what, I don't believe the Dame stuff. There's some Dame rumors floating. I do not believe them. I did get excited when I heard the rumors I started to do the thing like, all right, Wiseman, Wiggins, 7, 14, and 2 more firsts. And they would just have Dame, Curry, Clay, and Draymond. Like, okay, that's something. Dame comes back to the Bay, but I don't think that happens. But the Warriors are going to be better. Murray comes back February, March range, hopefully. And they'll add 1 more piece. The Nuggets are there. They're for real. And then who are we leaving out? There's got to be one. There's one more.
Clippers. Clippers are right back.
Clippers back. And then whatever happens with Utah.
Which Utah will be fine. Like I think Mike Conley will be back. That's another team that can't afford to lose Conley. I mean, what was it, 2017 when Hayward walked away and they had to kind of rebuild from there. You let Conley walk away and you're kind of in a similar position where you have no cap space and have to, replace him with like Jordan Clarkson as your full-time starter. You got to pay Mike Conley, real money to come back on a multi-year deal. But if they do, like, I was pretty disappointed in Utah this year, like to lose to the Clippers those last couple of games, but I still believe, that Donovan Mitchell can carry a team at that level. I still believe that Gobert, I mean, that was such a crappy matchup for Gobert against the Clippers. I still believe he can be like we said what Ayton's doing. I still believe Gobert can be championship level on that team. So I'm a big believer in the Jazz being right back where they were this year, record-wise, if they bring Conley back.
Would you feel good about giving Kawhi $50 million a year?
No. Again, but you have no choice. Like these free agents, like they've got their teams over a barrel. Like, what do you do if you're the Clippers? Like, you gave up every asset you have to go and get him. So you're going to let him walk to like Miami at the end of the season? Like that, you can't do it. So yeah, I don't know. As we record this, I don't know the extent of the Kawhi injury, if that's going to wind up being surgical or whatever. But even if it is, like, you got to pay the guy and deal with the consequences of maybe missing some of next year because of it. There's no choice. There's no choice that they have.
We're taping this before the Milwaukee-Atlanta game.
Yep.
If for some reason Milwaukee doesn't make the finals, if that's how this plays out, but they're stuck with the team they have, basically, they don't really have a lot of moves. They just gave Holiday this giant extension, trade all these picks for him, and Giannis obviously isn't going anywhere. So then you'd kind of look at Middleton. I do feel like they'd run it back, but I still feel like maybe the coach change is where that would go if they lost this. I'm convinced Rick Carlisle was going there. And that was why he left Dallas when he did before that Bucks-Nets series ended. And look, I have no proof. I'm not reporting this. I'm just a tea leaves guy. And I've talked to a couple different people, and I'm convinced he was going there. And then they won the series, and now he's in Indiana. I just feel like it's got to be finals or bust for Coach Bud. I don't care that he got by Brooklyn.
Well, does the Giannis injury, though, create an excuse to bring him back? I agree with you. And like, I had heard the same gossip, Carlisle leaves. Here's a ready-made contender in Milwaukee. He would be one of their first choices to replace Budenholzer. But I feel like Mike's winning that series and having Giannis go down. I feel like that's going to be enough to rationalize bring him back. I don't know that. I don't know if that's. I'm not sure that they don't beat Brooklyn if Brooklyn's healthy. Like, I think that's pretty clear, and probably don't next year as well. But I don't. I look at the market. Like, who do they replace him with at this point? Like, do you call Terry Stotts to come in and coach? Like, Steve Clifford.
That's a good point. They might have missed their window.
Yeah,
to get
like
somebody.
The window's kind of like, you want to elevate Darvin Ham. I mean, I don't know. Like,
but then you end up in that like mid 2010s OKC situation where it was clear Scotty Brooks wasn't the right guy, but now and all of a sudden you've lost another year when you realize, or even like the Brett Brown thing. Not that
I never buy the Scott Brooks wasn't the right guy. Like Scott Brooks, like
a zag with Scott Brooks.
A zag with Scott Brooks. I've always been a fan of Scott Brooks, and like the same, like all those years that they didn't get back to the finals. Like there are reasons for it. Like Durant goes down, Westbrook goes down. Like that team stays fully healthy, and they keep James Harden, of course. Like they win a championship. They do. I can't fathom a scenario where they don't. And that changed the perception all over again. Like, were they supposed to beat Miami in 2012? Like, no. Like they were completely overmatched by LeBron at his peak and having experienced the loss in the finals the year before. I think I love Scott as a coach, and I think they would have.
Wow,
won.
you love Scott. I love Scott. Amazing, Zach. I'm one of the best zags on my podcast in a while.
Big Scott Brooks guy. Like
I wish Joe House could come in right now to tell you about his wizard Scott Brooks thoughts.
Oh, I mean, look, I don't think he's the greatest in-game coach. I do think he's an excellent player development guy. Like, like his empowerment of Westbrook early was huge for his development. Like when everybody else was saying Russell Westbrook's not a point guard, Scott comes in replacing PJ in one of the more disastrous coaching stints ever. And empowers Russ and says, you're the point guard of this team. And, when like Magic Johnson's calling Russ like the worst point guard in the history of the finals, like, Scott never veered off that. And you can say like every coach, would support their guy, but I think he was really influential in the development of Westbrook, which Westbrook, who still backs him to the hilt right now, would probably tell you. So I don't think he's Phil Jackson out there, coaching in-game situations, but I think he can be a championship coach.
As we start thinking about past finals, what's the most shocking thing that you think could maybe happen
Atlanta
in the
winning?
next 3 months? I'm not even talking basketball. I'm talking after the finals. The most shocking thing that is actually like, even if it's a remote possibility, should at least be being discussed. Because for me, are we sure Kyrie Irving's going to be on the Nets next year? That would be mine.
I don't know, man. Like,
you like that one?
I do like that one. Like, I mean, but even if Sean Marks wanted to do it, well, first of all, the biggest problem with trading Kyrie is that no team in their right mind would take him on unless he's telling you he wants to be there. Because otherwise, he will either sulk his way through the next 2 years or like retire and travel the world, go to Zambia or wherever and just kind of fall off the map. Like he's too hard to trade for that reason, not because maybe you'd have to, deal with the Durant fallout or, potential locker room issues, but nobody's taking him on. Like what team would he want to go to? Like you're not going to trade him like to New Orleans or there's no scenario I can see where Kyrie would be happy going to a place. So in that sense, I don't think it's possible.
So you don't think Kyrie for Ben Simmons, like some sort of as the framework or something, is a possibility? I'm just completely making that up.
Don't you know that? Like, I mean, you covered Kyrie a lot. Like, he has such a thing about control, right? Like that was his big thing leaving Boston. Like I want to control my destiny. He chose Brooklyn. He chose to play with Durant. Like if he gets dumped on Philadelphia, it could turn out to be a great situation. I actually like the idea of Kyrie and Embiid playing together. That's a pretty dynamic. It's a 1-5, pretty dynamic duo. But I just can't imagine him being happy if he's shipped off to another place that he doesn't want to go to. I still look at my offseason's just fixated on Lillard. Like, what are these? Can these two guys have two sides have a meeting of the mind and realize they both kind of want the same thing? Like, Dame is sending out all these signals, like these cryptic Instagram posts, the leaking stuff to Chris Haynes. Like, he wants to go. He just doesn't want to look like the bad guy in saying he wants to go. Meanwhile, if you're Portland, if you're Neil O'Shea, you can't look at this team and say, like, we're a piece or two away from winning a championship. You're not, especially with the Western Conference loading up again for the next couple of years. Like, you can't do it. And you saw Dame this year, as dominant as he was, top 5, top 6 type of player. He was banged up at different points during the season. And he's like 2-month-long injury away from his trade value going from like 100% to 75. So if you're looking to deal him, now's the time. Like, you can get back with the right team one of the great hauls in trade history. You can get, if you want, Ben Simmons. You can get, I hate even discussing Boston as a possibility because we always do this, but Jaylen Brown, young players in every draft pick you've got, that might get the job done too. So you can get a pretty big haul for Damian Lillard right now, and I'm not sure that's going to be the case a year from now.
Paul George?
But does that do anything for you? Like,
that was theorized. Justin Barrier brought that up on the Ringer NBA show last night. And I was like,
you'd deal like CJ McCollum for Paul George and try to, keep it going. But if you deal for Paul George, aren't you just getting on the same hamster wheel where you're...
Yeah, but Paul George is way better than CJ McCollum, though.
No, if you can do that. If you can, trading, I'm saying Dame. Like, if you're talking trading Dame.
You don't feel like Paul George's trade... I feel like for me, in my mind, in my trade value rankings, Paul George really won me over in these playoffs. I actually thought he did some stuff, especially after Kawhi went out, that I didn't think he was capable of. And I don't hold last night against him. I think to do that every other night, where you basically have to be LeBron on the 2018 Cavs with this roster you have, where everything's got to flow through you. And also he's got the defense. He's got to play 40 minutes a night. They were being really physical with him. They had multiple swings to just throw at him over and over again, and Ayton in the paint. I was really impressed. I thought that was the best I've seen him.
No, I was impressed too, but what's the point if you're Portland? Like, if you're going to deal Damian Lillard, don't you want to kind of rebuild this thing? Like, I honestly think Portland should become Oklahoma City. Honestly, I think they should deal both those guys and try to get back blue chip, under control players like Oklahoma City did with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and a million draft picks. That's why I look at Jaylen Brown, who's got 3 years left on his deal. Ben Simmons signed through 2025. Like, those are the type of guys who are both 24 years old that you can start to rebuild this thing around. Paul George is 31, something like that. Like, I don't know that's going to point you in the direction you want to go.
Wiseman, Wiggins, 7-14, and 2 more firsts from
we got
1,000 points to late.
I mean, Wiggins is like the contract, though, right? We're not looking at Wiggins as an asset, are we?
No, it's a contract.